Jeremiah and Ruth Carter gave everything to the three white children they adopted: food, love, and the chance for a better future. Yet, when time and poverty took their toll, the children turned their backs, leaving the elderly couple to wither on a crumbling farm. For years, Jeremiah and Ruth suffered in silence, until one day, hidden under the dust in their attic, Jeremiah discovered a chest that would change everything. Soon after, the children returned, expecting wealth. But what they found in that old farmhouse was nothing like what they had imagined. Before we continue, if this is your first time watching one of our videos, we'd love for you to hit the subscribe button. Your support is invaluable and helps us bring you more powerful stories. Stick around until the end, and if this story resonates with you, drop a comment and share it with a friend. Now let's get started. The summer heat weighed heavily on the Carter farm. A thick warmth that pressed against your skin and made every breath feel laborious. Jeremiah Carter, his shoulders stooped from years of hard work, sat on the porch with his hands resting on his knees. His wife, Ruth, shuffled beside him, pulling her worn knitted shawl tighter around her shoulders, despite the still high sun. Age had slowed them both, but their eyes, deep, warm, and proud, still carried the weight of sacrifices that seemed to have been forgotten by everyone else. Neither of them had come from wealth, not even comfort. But when the opportunity arose to adopt three children, Michael, Sarah, and Daniel, they didn't hesitate. The color of their skin made no difference to Jeremiah and Ruth. They opened their hearts and home. Despite barely scraping by with their small farm, these children became their entire world. They carried them on weary backs, fed them from nearly empty plates, and scraped together pennies to ensure the kids had shoes, books, and a shot at a better life. But now those children were grown, and what the elderly couple had hoped would be their reward, companionship in their later years, turned into silence, distance, and disdain. One evening, Ruth stood at the kitchen table, watching as Sarah packed expensive clothes into a suitcase. Michael leaned against the wall, his face twisted in irritation. "This place is just dirt and dust," he muttered. "We can't keep living like this." Daniel, the youngest, laughed as he brushed past Ruth without so much as a glance. "You think we're staying here? Please, we've got lives to live." Ruth's lips quivered as she reached out to touch Sarah's sleeve, her voice faltering. "We gave you everything we had. Every drop of sweat was for you. How can you turn your backs on us now?" But Sarah didn't meet her gaze. She zipped up her suitcase and turned away. Later, neighbors would say they saw the three children walking down the dirt road that night, leaving the farm behind without looking back once. Some murmured in disapproval, shaking their heads from their porches. Others whispered, maybe the Carters raised them too soft. Maybe they wanted more than a life on a poor farm. Jeremiah stood in the doorway, watching the dust from their departure settle into the earth. His calloused hand gripped the doorframe, veins bulging, but he said nothing. Ruth sank into a chair beside him, her breath shallow, as though each step those children took away was pulling the life from her chest. The farmhouse creaked in the night wind, now empty in a way it had never been before. And for the first time in decades, the Carters were truly alone. The seasons passed, but the Carter farm seemed frozen in its grief. Weeds overtook the once proud garden. The barn sagged under its own weight, and the fields that had once produced harvests now stood silent. Each day Jeremiah woke before dawn, not because there was much to do anymore, but because his routine kept him going. He would shuffle to the porch, sit in his old wooden chair, and stare out at the dry fields, as though willing them to forgive him for his failures. Ruth had grown weaker. Her hands, once deft at sewing and baking bread, now trembled as she struggled to lift even a small cup of water. Neighbors sometimes saw her wrapped in her old shawl, slowly moving between the house and porch. Her steps were short, her gaze lowered. They pitied her, but their pity came with hushed whispers. "What a shame," one woman murmured to another by the roadside. "They raised those kids like their own. And look at how they've repaid them." The other woman shook her head. "Blood or not, you think adoption meant something? But I don't think those kids ever saw Jeremiah and Ruth as real parents." The Carters never heard these words directly, but they felt their weight in every passing glance, in every moment when neighbors avoided their gaze. The children never wrote, never called. They were out there somewhere, Michael in the city with his sharp suits, Sarah posting vacation photos online, and Daniel working in an office he never mentioned to his parents. The Carters knew this because neighbors occasionally brought gossip, like scraps tossed to hungry dogs. "I saw Michael's face on a flyer for some law firm," one neighbor said. "Sarah was in the paper for some charity gala." The old couple would listen quietly, then nod, their faces calm, but their hearts pressed harder against their ribs. Jeremiah still tried to keep the farm alive. He patched roofs with mismatched boards, dug through rusted tools to fix broken gates, even when his hands cracked from the cold. But the soil seemed to mock him, offering nothing but dust. One bitter winter morning, Ruth collapsed in the kitchen. The sound of her fall shook Jeremiah to his core. He hurried inside, his knees buckling as he carefully lifted her, repeatedly calling her name. She stirred, her eyes barely opening. "I'm just so tired," she murmured. He stayed by her side for hours, holding her hand, waiting for her breathing to slow down. That night, as the winds howled through the gaps in the farmhouse, Jeremiah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if their story had come to an end. Two old souls left behind, fading away in a place where no one cared. But destiny, though silent, had not finished with them yet. One evening, while fixing a leaking roof beam, Jeremiah's hand brushed against a loose plank. Behind it, hidden in the dust and shadows of the attic, he felt something, an old wooden chest. It had been concealed for decades, just waiting. Jeremiah stared at it, as though it had no right to be there, tucked away behind splintered wood and years of dust. His hands shook as he pulled it free, the wood creaking like a sigh from another era. It was heavier than he expected, covered in cobwebs, its brass latch tarnished with age. For hours he sat cross-legged in the dim attic, his rough fingers tracing the surface, unsure about opening it. It felt like it carried the weight of memories, of secrets left by generations who had lived and died on this land. Finally he pried open the latch, the sound breaking the silence like thunder. Inside there were stacks of brittle papers, folded letters, and thick envelopes. At first he thought it was just old correspondence, yellowed and forgotten. But when he unfolded one document, his breath caught. It was a deed, his family's deed, showing that their land was part of a larger property tied to valuable mineral rights beneath the soil. His grandfather had signed the papers almost 50 years ago, securing legal ownership for Jeremiah's bloodline. Hidden within those papers was the proof. The Carter farm, though poor on the surface, sat on land of immense worth. Jeremiah pressed the papers to his chest, his eyes welling with tears. All those years of struggling, the nights of hunger, the days of being mocked as poor farmers. The truth had been buried just above their heads. When he carried the box downstairs, Ruth was waiting by the fire, her frail hands folded in her lap. She looked up, weary but curious as Jeremiah spread the papers on the table. In a hushed voice he explained, still in disbelief himself. Ruth leaned closer, her eyes wide. "Jeremiah, are you telling me, all this time?" she asked. He nodded slowly, emotion catching in his throat. "This land isn't worthless, Ruth. It never was. It's been holding something all along, something far bigger than us." They didn't rush. For weeks, Jeremiah took the papers into town, consulting a lawyer who raised an eyebrow with each document. Soon whispers began to spread, not of pity, but of curiosity. Neighbors saw men in suits arriving, walking around the property, measuring, pointing. Some muttered, "What are the Carters up to?" Others dismissed it, convinced it was another dead end. But the couple's silence kept the mystery alive. At night, Ruth sat at the kitchen table, her frail fingers brushing over the paper edges as if they were delicate treasures. A faint smile appeared on her face for the first time in years as she whispered, "Maybe this is God's way, giving us back what we lost." And though their house remained old and worn, though their clothes hung loose on their tired bodies, there was a new light in their eyes. The tide was turning, and their children, who had once abandoned them, had no idea what was coming. In a small town, news travels fast. It began with whispers in the general store. "Did you see those men in suits at the Carter place?" By the following week, everyone knew the old farm wasn't as worthless as people once thought. Some guessed it was oil. Others talked about developers, but no one knew for sure except Jeremiah and Ruth. Then, drawn by the scent of money, the children came back. First, Michael's sleek car pulled up, his shoes clicking sharply on the dirt driveway. A stark contrast to his father's worn boots. Sarah arrived next, in a dress too fine for farm dust, her smile brittle. Finally, Daniel swaggered in, patting his parents on the back with a warmth that felt hollow. They filled the old kitchen with chatter, laughter, and exaggerated affection. Neighbors watched from across the fields, muttering under their breath. "Look who's back," one man said. "Didn't see them around when the roof was caving in." Another shook her head. Now that there's talk of money, suddenly they remember who raised them. Jeremiah remained quiet, his weathered hands folded. Ruth sat beside him, fragile but steady. They listened as their children spoke of family, of staying connected, of making up for lost time. But beneath their words was an expectation, greedy anticipation that soon, the inheritance would be theirs. When the lawyer finally arrived, briefcase heavy with contracts, the children leaned forward eagerly, their names ready to be etched into the wealth they believed they deserved. But Jeremiah's voice cut through the room, low and firm. "This land," he began, "was never about money. It was about sacrifice. And sacrifice is something you three never learned." Michael's smile faded. Sarah's eyes darted nervously. Daniel muttered under his breath. The lawyer cleared his throat and read aloud the documents. The mineral rights and land value, worth millions, would be transferred into a charitable trust. The wealth would go to help struggling farmers, support adoption centers, and fund scholarships for children who understood gratitude. Not a single penny would go to the children who had abandoned them. The room went still. Sarah's jaw dropped. Michael slammed his palm on the table. Daniel stormed out, muttering curses. But outside, neighbors gathered, whispering in approval. "Justice," one man said quietly. "That's justice." Ruth reached for Jeremiah's hand, her grip weak but certain. For the first time in years, they felt lighter. They had not only preserved their legacy, but ensured it would live on through others who knew the value of love and sacrifice. That night, as the sun set behind the horizon, the old couple sat on their porch, fingers intertwined, watching the wind blow through the fields. The house remained creaky, their bodies still tired. But their story, their sacrifice, had finally found its meaning. The children walked away empty-handed, but the legacy remained eternal. Jeremiah and Ruth's story serves as a reminder. Gratitude costs nothing, but it can change everything. Betrayal may hurt, but justice always finds its way home. If this story touched you, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because more powerful stories like this one are on their way.